So for those of you that have been following the Floki Wildlife Park project, you will know that recently we finished the Temperate Hills. Our last video was a tour of this area. If you would like to watch that, make sure to check it out on the channel. I had quite a lot of fun making a tour video. It was kind of interesting. But today we are very excited to be starting a new region in the park. It's probably going to be a slightly smaller one than the Temperate Hills. I imagine this will be the smallest area in the zoo in total, and you may be able to guess just by the flooring or the pathing that we're using here. And this is a winter wonderland area. This area is going to focus on animals that are either from the tundra or taiga biome, and that's just because both of those biomes have quite a lot of snow in them. They're very cool, so these animals are going to fit together quite nicely. Here we are starting to build the Arctic fox habitat, and all I'm doing is laying out the general shape that I want using the wooden log barrier. I want to try and match the curvature of this path that I've used that is going to be the viewing gallery. In this part of the zoo, I'm going to focus quite a bit more on the viewing galleries. Normally what I do is I just have the viewing gallery be part of our main path, but here I want to have offshoots from the main path so that we have designated areas, so that people that are travelling from area to area aren't just clogging up these viewing galleries and making it really, really crowded. So as you can see, it kind of branches off from our main path there. Here you can see the archway that I've built. I'm not going to show you it in full detail. We're going to leave that till I do a little tour of this area. But basically that was created using the new faux rocks and changing the colour to white. I am falling in love with these faux rocks so quickly. You can do so much with them, and I just think they are generally really, really cool. Now, the idea for the shape of this habitat is just to fill this area, basically. But the height of the fences at the back is going to be quite tall, just to kind of deepen the idea of it being an extended kind of habitat. Yeah. The idea is that it extends further than what we can see, so by having it raised up at the back, it kind of suggests that. It kind of suggests that it starts to become like a wooded area back there. Then at the front of this enclosure, where we want our animals to be seen from the viewing gallery, we are going to keep the fence nice and short, and that is because these animals only require a 1.25 meter tall barrier. So we can have the viewing gallery at the front just be looking over the fence, rather than windows or something, and that will just create a much more immersive experience for our guests. And I think it's quite interesting to have variation in height of the fences. It just makes the barriers themselves look a bit more interesting than just, you know, a plain boxy barrier. And here you can see me actually finding out what the height's going to be. If you go onto the Zoopedia page, you can always find out the requirements for an animal's habitat before you start building it, which can be really useful if you want to figure out how much space they're going to need and how high the barriers need to be before you even place them in there. That is an excellent tool. Just use the Zoopedia page. So yeah, I added the height of the barrier at the front, make it nice and short so that the guests can see straight over into the habitat. And just to be sure that our Arctic foxes aren't going to be leaping out over the top of this habitat barrier, we're going to start to create our water area. And you know me, I like to have natural water sources rather than water pumps or bowls. So I'm just going to dig kind of a moat around this really low fence, and then I'll expand it a little bit to make it a bit more interesting than just a line. And we're going to fill that with water, and that will be our natural water source for this habitat. Before I'd even started building this habitat, I'd already popped a cooler underground. You can slightly see the mist in the center of this enclosure, which indicates the cooler is there. And as the cooler has had its effect to start to cool down this area, I can start to place some snow without worrying about it melting too much. Now, the Arctic fox, without them even being in here, I know they are going to need predominantly snow for their ground coverage. As you can see, the cooler wasn't on for quite long enough, and the corners are still a little bit too warm. Therefore, the snow has melted and created a stony coverage instead. This part of pathing here really caused me quite a lot of problems. I thought it would work perfectly. It seems like the perfect size gap, but for some reason it just would not join to our main path. So I ended up having to move the wind turbine and stuff and rejig this path a little bit. But back there, another thing that I built without filming it is a staff area, which we will again show you when we do a tour. bit more fancy than last time. Last time it was just a couple buildings with an underground tunnel. I didn't even show you. But this time I will actually show you what I've done. Initially this video was only going to be about the Arctic fox and the red panda was going to be left for a separate video. But as you can see, I have clearly accidentally forgotten to film the rock work for this enclosure. And normally wouldn't be too much of a problem. But I put in quite a bit of effort to make this nice little cave as their shelter, which is quite frustrating. So I've re-recorded it with the red pandas because I do a very similar thing for them. So that's why you're getting 2 habitat builds in this one episode today. In terms of the plant coverage, we're keeping it quite light. We're going to use some really tall trees to kind of indicate the depth that I was talking about earlier. As if though at the back it could expand into a forest. It kind of just makes the back look a bit more dense if you're looking at it from the viewing gallery at the front. The caribou moss is a favourite of mine for cold habitats. It's a great way of just covering a large space, quite a large portion of ground in one go. And yeah, aside from that, there's not too much. I start to add a little bit more colour after those with some flowers and stuff. And I line the front viewing gallery area, that short barrier, I line that with some lovely flowers. And just let our animals get on with it. That's kind of it for this habitat, aside from adding the enrichment items. So let's hop on over to the red pandas. For the red panda habitat, I try to mirror the pathing system that I used on the other side, and that is the offshoot from the main path to kind of direct our guests towards a purposefully built viewing gallery. So I'm just using the frosted ice path that I've used for the rest of this area, but I'm reducing it down to 4 meters, different to the 7 meter path that I normally use, or that I've used for the main paths. And then we're just going to make a lovely little offshoot that we will be leaving a gap with. And this gap will be filled after we built the habitats. I will add a lovely little plant area kind of thing, fenced off, just to fill that gap. Because otherwise it's just a grassy strip. We want it to be a little bit more filled up. So yeah, just adding that path and then we will actually get on with the habitat. The space that is available for the red panda habitat is very much more limited than the Arctic fox. The Arctic fox had quite a bit of space, whereas here it's a lot tighter. I didn't actually realise until I put the barrier in place just how small this area was. From first glance, I thought it was just as big, so that was quite annoying. But it presents us with a challenge, and challenges are always good. So we're going to have to try and make this work for the animals, make sure they have got enough space in here. A top tip for if you are struggling for space is to create layers. If you go back and watch my black and white ruffed lemur habitat build, it was also the restaurant build episode for this zoo, you will see me create a second platform for which the animals can get onto. This expands or extends the traversable area for them, meaning that it's not just the ground area. Instead, you are creating a second platform that does that does count towards their total traversable area, which is a really good way of kind of extending or expanding a habitat without having to really heavily alter it. Just like with the Arctic fox, the first thing that I'm going to be doing in this habitat is digging a natural water source. And I kind of like the idea of there being a couple pockets of water that they can kind of climb over, because I want there to be a climbing feature to this habitat. Not only do red pandas enjoy a bit of climbing, but whenever I see them in zoos, they are predominantly living in trees. There are climbing frames stretching between various trees and stuff. So I wanted to try and mimic that a little bit. So yeah, I'm going to have some water on the ground because they're not necessarily going to need to be able to walk about on the floor all that much, because there'll be plenty of tree space. So I need to hide this cooler a little bit, put it in the ground, and I'm going to need to make sure that it's powered. So in order to power it, I'm just going to pop a wind turbine right next to the habitat gate, as that is a staff-only path anyway, meaning that it will have a slightly smaller effect, or slightly smaller negative effect on our guests. And just like with the Arctic fox habitat, we're going to drop the fence at the very front and make that be our guest viewing gallery. But a big difference is we're going to need to add a climb-proof barrier. Now, these animals love a good climb, and there is every chance that they would just climb straight out of this habitat and then start running amok around this winter wonderland. And of course, we don't want that. As much as we want to give a red panda a cuddle, because look at them, how can you not want to give those furry little creatures a bit of a cuddle, we are going to try and keep them in here. Not only for the guest safety, because they do have claws, they can scratch, but also for their own safety, because we don't want guests accidentally hurting these adorable little animals. Now, let's get them into our habitat after they've been quarantined, so that we can start to alter the terrain and stuff to their needs. And with the arrival of these mist-coloured raccoons, we can start to alter the terrain to meet their terrain distribution needs. And they are an animal that requires quite a nice mix. I did think it was mainly going to be snow, which is, well, it's just what I expected because they live up in the Himalayas and stuff. They're living up in the mountains. But, of course, that means they're going to have a range of ground textures. It's not just going to be snow, is it? They're going to require quite a bit of soil and rock and even some short grass. So, yeah, this was quite a patchy terrain, and I quite enjoyed doing that. Now we're getting to the plant life for this habitat, and we're going to use quite a few trees nearer the back portion or around the edges of the habitat, making sure we're not blocking the viewing at the front of the viewing gallery. We don't want there to be any trees right at the front because that's just not very good for our guests. We're also going to use a couple of tree stumps here and there, and we're not going to go mad with ground coverage, but we are going to make sure that there is still a little bit there. Whilst we're doing this, I decided to start to build the cave at the back, and that's going to be where our animals are, well, they're going to be sleeping. That is going to be their hard shelter. And that is one of the best uses for these faux rocks, in my opinion, is to create a nice natural and organic looking hard shelter, somewhere that animals would actually take refuge. They would actually be sleeping in the real world. Now, when you are building something like this, one of the best bits about the faux rocks is that you can change the colour. And so what I did was I used the preset colours that you have available to you on console, and for the recess colour, because the two colours that you can change for the rocks is either the cracks, the recesses, and then the main body colour. So for the recess colour I changed it to pure white, and then for the main colour I turned it to the absolute lightest blue available, which makes it just look like a bit of ice, a really, really cold rock, that kind of thing. So yeah, I make a basic cave structure out of those, and I use a lot of these smaller clusters of rocks. These things are great, and I am looking forward to using those going forward. It not only adds variation to the size of the rocks, which makes it look a lot more natural, like things are broken off and whatnot, but it is also going to help you flesh out water areas, because obviously streams and rivers very often have rocks at the bottom of them, a lot of pebbles and all that have gathered together. So being able to do this using these faux rocks is excellent. So yeah, once I've built that little cave structure, I then move on to adding the enrichment items and such, and starting to create a climbing frame. The climbing frame is really quite simple. I just create a square kind of platform around the trunk of one tree, make sure it's supported with various logs and stuff, and then use another log to create a bridge, support that with a Y piece, and then have it slowly slant to the floor. And having it stretch across the habitat like this really, really helps to just kind of spread out where our animals are going to be, because otherwise they may just kind of stick to one area, even though this habitat is quite small, which means they probably are going to be using quite a lot of the space. Just spreading out the climbing frame helps make sure they really are going to be using quite a lot of it. And with that in mind, also when you're placing your enrichment items, make sure that they are spread out, because that will also help your animals use up the whole of the space you've given them. Now, I'm going to stop talking for a minute, just let you sit back and watch this little time lapse and enjoy. Then we'll be back to have a final look at how these habitats turned out. When it came to filling this grassy area near the viewing galleries, this empty patch, what I decided to do was take the Twilight Pack fencing, which I am a big fan of. I really like this kind of, what's it called? Twilight Portcullis gate section. Yeah, whatever. I really like this gate. So what I'm going to do is just outline this grassy patch, and then using the filters that are applied because of the Arctic fox habitat, I'm just going to use plant life from those filters and fill this little area. I'm just going to use a couple different types of flower because I don't want to overcomplicate things, keep it rather simple. And that's just a nice effective way of filling in a gap like this. I like to rely on nature for gap filling in my zoo, so just use plants and flowers and stuff, and maybe the occasional pretty fence like this one. I also decided to add a bit of seating to this viewing gallery. I think it'd be quite nice to take a break and sit on a bench watching these animals. I'm going to be using the New World bench as I really like that plank kind of look. I think it will blend into this area quite well. And I'm also going to be using the bins from the aquatic pack. They're this stone kind of looking bin, which later on I am going to, like I didn't at the time of filming this video, I do it even later than that. But what I'm going to do is change the colour of these to make them look like big blocks of ice or snow, you know what I mean? Because you can change the colour of these just like you can with the faux rocks. I also add a couple education boards on the wall and some donation bins and stuff. And with that, these two habitats are complete. Thank you so much for having watched this video. If you liked it, please consider giving it a thumbs up and maybe subscribing to the channel to see more videos like this appearing in your subscription feed. Thank you for watching, and until next time, I'll see you later.